Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Richard Reynolds from Anglian Water. Richard is Anglian Water's Senior Agronomy Advisor and will be exploring the opportunities available to landowners to alleviate the increasing challenges that exist around water.
Hi, without further ado, as the intro said, I'm Rich Reynolds. I look after our catchment management program, which is a program we've been running for the last 10 years, looking at how we can work with landowners to work together to mitigate diffuse pollution, reduce the challenges. And some of you might be familiar with WINEP as a broad. Oh, that's not the first slide I expected. So WINEP is the Water Industry National Environment Program and is a collection of a wide range of different measures that we as a water company are doing to work with the environment. What's changed here is the AWINEP is a new program that we've put to the Environment Agency to say, well, how can we work more closely with other people that work in this environment? How can we put some new money in here and look at see how can we work with partners to deliver things? So instead of us being the only source of the solution, where else can we bring people in? How can we use the new mechanisms like biodiversity net gain and those sort of things to manage the challenges? I'm conscious that some of you in the audience must be aware of us talking about AWINEP since about 2023, and finally we're able to start coming forward and give some of the actual details about the grants that are happening. So it's definitely a good step forward. So just to look at the challenges, the big picture that we have at the moment, the landscape that we're facing in the next 5-10 years. We know we're going to be having abstraction license restrictions. We know the climate, floods and droughts and those sort of things. We just look at the dry weather we had over the last year, but then looking back to 2022 when we had droughts, that sort of change in climate is definitely something that's impacting. Soil health is much more of a focus on regen and those sort of things. But then the traditional funding sources are starting to dry up. So we need to start looking and changing and seeing how the landscape's going to be changing, whether it's bringing in things like rewilding, whether it's different types of crops coming into that landscape. I always try and look and think, 10 years' time, what is this landscape going to look like? How much more things like maize, what might we be seeing that's taking over from other things? But then there's also a strong environmental driver of protecting and maintaining triple SIs, making sure we're looking after key species, and then also looking after the brand that is Norfolk, looking after that kind of rural commodity that huge amounts of the rest of the public look at and say, this is why we want to be in here. So pessimistically, you could look and say we've got a perfect storm happening with climate challenges, with economic challenges, with environmental challenges. And it's in this landscape here where we've looked and spoken to our regulators and said, we need to be able to look at the challenges in a different way. If we only use the old tools that we used in the past, we're never going to be fit for working with what the solutions are. And this is kind of what the AWINEP program is kind of intended to do. So it's a program to look at different approaches to meet our environmental obligations, to look at improving that environment, improving bathing waters, but using things like nature-based solutions, which are, from a water company perspective, which is a very engineering-orientated organization, quite a scary space to be talking into, but looking and saying, where can we bring nature as part of those solutions? It's not going to fix everything, but it's a really important part that we haven't necessarily brought in. And the other key thing is, this is not about trying to do it all on our own. This is about how can we bring our partners in, the other people that know about individual areas, that know the local details way more than we might necessarily, and therefore can bring all of those sort of skills, that coordination, that science, that understanding into getting a solution. So AWINEP's about working in partnership, making those rural communities part of that solution, which isn't something that we've been able to do from the past. So in terms of those challenges, it is about saying, well, where can we get kind of new money, new ways of looking at things, new resources, and looking at, the problems. The problems haven't really changed. We've got still reduced nutrient losses. Well, we've got nutrient losses that are coming off the landscape. We've got a lot of biodiversity that we're looking to try and do. Probably the changes more that we're seeing in the short term are things like climate, where it used to be okay, but now the droughts are pushing harder. We've got the sandy soils and those sort of things, which mean that we can't necessarily achieve what we're hoping to, but also tying in with that community side of things. So AWNEP is looking to try and address a whole lot of things. The really important thing here is we're developing a mechanism. This is not about having, this is the exact solution we're going to use for absolutely everything. We can design the tools, we can put the funding out there with an idea of how does this connect into a much broader network of people that can contextualize the challenges and look at solutions in different ways. To me, if there's a solution and 3 people are in a room trying to work out what the solution is, it's never going to be as good and robust as 20, 30 local people who will look at it in a different way and value it in a different way. And it's trying to tie into that there. And I would say it's not a traditional place for a water company where a lot of our solutions are about engineering, and we'll get a piece of kit that will work into a certain set of criteria. A lot of the solutions we're looking at here are difficult to, what is the value, what is the measure? So we are starting slowly. And this isn't being rolled out across the whole of the Anglian region. It's just been rolled out in the catchments that we've got over here and this grant scheme. So it's a fairly hefty pot of money, which is always a good thing. So we've got 11 million to spend in grant funding across the 11 AWNEP target catchments that we've got over here. Absolutely ties into this sort of area. And the target for the grant fund that I'm talking about today very much talks on this, which we're launching essentially today. So it's only in these areas, but this is not only just for farmers and for landowners, those things. It absolutely ties into the community groups that a lot of you are part of. What's the connection that you have of bringing people together to address the sorts of challenges? And the challenges that we're hoping to address by this, the aim for this funding here is reducing nutrient pollution into waters and groundwaters. So this is focusing on phosphates and working on nitrates, as well as mitigating the impacts of low flow. And as long as the bids, the projects, the ideas that you have tie into delivering those 2 projects, then they will be appropriate for the sort of grant funding. Things like additional biodiversity, recreation value, cultural value are all important. But if they're only delivering those things, but they're not targeting into these kind of key drivers there, then it won't be appropriate for this sort of grant funding here. And this is about creating a broad scope, but still saying we still need to be tackling those sort of 2 main challenges. Paper going everywhere. So in terms of the grant itself, all of the grant applications will be scored. We've got a scoring matrix. But before we tie into that, we have done a bit of modelling. And we're conscious saying that modelling is always as good as a model will be. But we've got an idea that ties in an idea of the sorts of range of ideas that we're looking at and what the impacts are going to be. And that's identified a range of nature-based solutions that will be appropriate in different areas. In terms of the grant, we'd also be looking for match funding. I think it's important that we are able to catalyse and to bring new money into different areas. So we will need a minimum of 50% match funding, but naturally the more additional funding from different sources absolutely are a favourable side of things. That 50% match basically means for every pound that Anglian Water contributes, £1 will come in from an additional funding source. Things like in-kind funding and that sort of stuff will add to that broader picture, but it is matching a kind of a pound for pound coming through. Projects that deliver more of the sort of secondary benefits that I talked about, the social, the nature, the biodiversity, are all really important. And the more that we can be delivering of those sort of things, naturally we'll get a higher scoring. And then in terms of timescale, naturally it is about, there will be some projects that are looking quite far into the future, but we need to prioritize a level of delivery. So the sooner your project can be delivered, the sooner we can actually get that funding on board and bring it through. So in terms of the application process, and as I said, we haven't really publicised this before, so if you've got any questions, I think there's probably a copy of these slides that are going to be back at the stands at the back, but an opportunity to tie into those. So broadly, the grant fund has launched now, and the grant application will be opening. The grant application, this is the kind of pre-conversations. The grant itself will open at the end of January. So we're slightly ahead of things, but it'll be open for a 2-month period, and then we'll close and we will review and score all of the bids that are around that we get, and we'll score it, we'll do an offer. And if for some reason the project isn't successful, it doesn't mean it's precluded from being submitted in a future time. So we'll work together with you to say, actually, this is a really interesting project. We need to see a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that to try and help and adapt it. And I think those are the sorts of things that make this funding different from the way we funded things in the past. That historically it's been, here's an option, didn't like it, we're not going to talk to you again. Here it's about saying, well, how can we work through it? Actually, it might be another of an idea that's really good, and we need to add a little bit more things in there to get it to where it needs. So we will have a phase of 2 months open for grants applications to come through, and then 2 months where we're doing the scoring and the award and how we're doing that, and then tying in from there. So in terms of the kind of practicalities, the minimum bid that we'll be taking in here is 20 grand. But there's currently no cap on the top. And this is particularly because Anglian Water does have a range of other grant funds that are tying into values less than that. So what we don't want to do is create competition on other things. So we, for example, have got a farm innovation grant. We've got training grants, we've got trials grants, and those sort of things that fill a lot of those sort of conversation pieces in that smaller area. Here, I think the 20 grand is a really interesting price point because it allows us to potentially scale up and do a project on a couple of lands, a smallish project on 3 or 4 farms that kind of tie into that area, and that scaling is a really important thing. We want to be able to put the tools in place that can be spread as wide as possible. So other things that are excluded are the feasibility studies. We want to be funding things that we can actually be delivering. And we wouldn't be looking to put match funding into an existing project. But if there's an existing project that needs new funding for the second phase or something like that, that would be something that we would consider. We're working it out at the moment. So these are the sorts of thoughts. And if you've got any thoughts, if you've got any questions, absolutely encourage you. Come and talk to us and bring the things that you are thinking about that might tie in. Another thing that's different here is that historically our grants have been targeted one particular group. So the grants that I run are typically targeted to farmers groups. Here, this is open to anybody with a vested interest in that local landscape. So absolutely farmers and landowners, but things like charities, NGOs, community groups, academic institutions, local councils. It's open to that broad group, and recognizing that you might have a much better connection with the local landowners in an area than we could. So why would we try and talk to 6 groups and 6 individuals in an individual catchment when actually you've got that link there and you can work as that broker there? So it's recognizing the different skills that people can bring in here, and how can we look at solutions, how can we scale up solutions in a different way. So as I said, end of 2026 we go live with the pilot round of the grant, and the sorts of projects, examples of ones that we're thinking of, and these are examples, I'm sure that we'll be having all sorts of other ones, are things like riparian restoration, so bank top revegetation, that sort of revegetation things, bioengineering, looking at any sort of features that can reduce runoff, so leaky dams, wetlands, all those sort of things, floodplain reconnection, any of those sort of things that restore that natural landscape that we've got, land use change, so to complement the other measures that are out there at the moment, changes to species-rich grassland, native wetlands, native woodlands, peatlands, all of those sort of things. And then also kind of those soil management practices. What are those things that we can do to bring in more of that resilience that helps provide that flood mitigation buffer? That helps keep some of those nutrients that we're using, or potentially exploring different ways of keeping it on the land. Cover crops are probably the most popular thing, but what are the other measures? And I know there's a lot of adopters of the sort of regen farming practice in this area. How are those sort of ones that we can use as a catalyst to deliver the benefits that we need? So as a brief recap of what we're looking at, AWNEP is an £11 million grant funding project. The 2 drivers that we focused on above all is reducing that nutrient pollution into rivers and groundwaters. If you're not sure where you are, how it ties into all those different areas, I suggest looking at a tool like Magic. Magic Map, you can pick up the groundwater and the surface water areas to give an idea on where it ties into, as well as to mitigate the impact of low flows, so any of those kind of flow things there. Focused very much in this Norfolk area. I think they do have copies of these slides on but yeah, reducing the locations essentially in the Norfolk area. And if you remember the map that I put back there, why are we doing it? Everybody's good reading, so I'm not going to read through all of those sort of things. But essentially, all the things that a group in this environment is looking to, this is one of the tools that we're starting to play around with and saying, what could it look like? I would emphasize again that this is a process that we're already shaping, that we're designing it, and it will adapt in time, and we very much want to develop in partnership with people. So any questions, any thoughts, any ways that we can change it so that it can deliver more, can achieve more, are the things that we want to. They're limitations that we have, and we've got to work through the processes and the structure that we have that's getting the funding. But this is unique in that it is tying in. It's not saying that's a fixed solution, we're going to pay this amount to deliver that. It's recognizing that actually there's lots of local nuance on where you are in the context of where it is. So we're not doing a £500 for every kilometre of that. It'll be, well, what is the context? What's tying in there? I would think about things like, how are you going to measure success? The more of those other benefits you can tie into to help emphasize with the additional kind of connections in. And I said the grant, there'll be lots more information going out, but the grant will itself open on the 28th of January. So signing up in terms of a QR code there, we all love a good QR code. Stand 27, as you came in the door there, immediately in front of you is stand 27, so there should be a whole lot of people that can support and help on that. And an email address if you want it, but please reach out to us, speak to us. It is a new program, so we're looking and finding a new way of connecting in, and hopefully this addresses some of the frustrations that we've had with existing programs in the past, and gives us a new way of working. So a really quick summary. I think I'm slightly ahead of time, which is never a bad thing, but thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Rich. And I was going to say, if you pop your headphones off, you'll hear everyone applauding you. There we go. Thank you very much.